Greetings, quality people. I'm Jeff Vieira.
I'm Norm Howe, and this is the Fearless Workplace. Jeff, this week our guests are Aundre Blasingame, CEO of Heavenly Catering International, and Emily Bopp, co-founder of Enable Inc. Emily was with us recently talking about fear of conversation about race, and this is part two of that episode. Today, Emily and Andre together talk about the fears both black and white folks have on this topic. But before we dive in, let me introduce Andre a little bit more fully. As I said, he's the CEO of Heavenly Catering International. And before being named CEO in 2008, Andre was HCI's executive chef and was responsible for all of the company's sales, operations, management of the supply chain, sales activities, service support of all markets in all countries, even. And he's also the founder of Heavenly Consulting, which is the coaching and consulting division of HCI and helps C level executives and small businesses find their purpose and exceed their goals. So, and in addition to that, Andre also sits on the board of Black Culinary Alliance Global, an organization built on bringing awareness and equity to race, food, social justice. And as if he had more time on his hands, he is also the CEO of SOAR Hospitality and Travel, president of Old School to New School. Well, I got to hear about that. Both of which are nonprofits centered on helping youth become future change agents. And Emily, who we interviewed previously, runs cohorts of primarily white leaders through a program that reflects her own journey, choosing to see racial realities broadly and deeply in our society. And Emily and Andre hosted an open conversation on racial realities between their respective networks, which they called the Merge Summit. And I'd like to hear more about that as we go on. But we're really thrilled to have both of them here. And so, Andre, I want to start with you, if you don't mind. You you have to create food that tastes great, and this seems like very much of an art to me. But yet, on the same time, you have to worry about logistics, cost, HR, marketing, and probably a bunch of accounting gibberish as well. Why hasn't your head exploded?
Now that's a good question to start with. So the main reason is because even though all those things are listed under my title, most of that is delegated out to an incredible team that takes care of me in doing it. So they always have me bulk up my resume when talking to other people, like most CEOs of companies. Like you guys all know CEOs and probably been CEOs. You know, you're the chief financial officer, you're the chief integration officer, the integrity officer, you're HR, when really you're the person that tells everybody else what to do. They just try to give you a beautiful looking title to go with it, right? So that's why my head hasn't exploded because I've delegated. So
And humble too. Hey, boy, that's that's cool.
Andre, what I really want to know is with everything that you're doing, do you really have time to cook or are you delegating that too?
uh, half and half. I love cooking, right? I love cooking. And sometimes, as my staff would tell me, it's hard for me to pull myself out of the kitchen. I compete regularly, especially in the World Food Championships. And like this year with the World Food Championships, I have four teams in there. I have two barbecue teams and two savory teams. Three of them are my high school teams that I coach, right? And so because of that, I love to create and be an artist and always getting into it. So it's hard for me to pull away from cooking. That's why I say 50-50, because often I have to tell myself, look, okay, get your out of the kitchen. Okay? Get out of the kitchen and let these people do their job. They don't need you to be Gordon Ramsay. They need you to be Gordon Ramsay CEO that sits in the office and delegates. Okay? So about 50-50. But cooking is a great passion, of me. And my moniker is health and wealth is the future of my people. And who are my people? Anybody listening to my voice right now. And food is a huge component to that. So, yeah, that's the
Uh,
short synopsis.
quick follow up, Andre, and this is one that I'd like to hear your opinion too, Emily. On is food one of those things that can really unite us?
Yes. I'm going to chime in first and then I'll turn it over to Emily. Yes, because what I tell people all the time as a chef, 100% of people eat food. Okay? I don't care whether it's chopped up, ground up, you drink it. 100% of people, even the people that are starving, homeless, 100% of people on this planet eat food in some form. And most of the times, when you have important meetings, when you have important family gatherings, when you are meeting your spouse for the first date ever, when you go to meet their parents, when you go for your first day of school, food is involved, and it's usually a great conversation uniter. And because we're in such a climate issue right now, and this farce that they call food shortage, we don't have a food shortage. We just have to get better planning. Because that's one of the one of the things that I stand on. We waste more food in the United States than we feed people in other countries. So if we could minimize some waste, right, and have more conversations about composting like they do in San Francisco and repurposing that to grow more crops, we would have a lot less problems with race issues if we were focusing on the fact that we're going to go hungry in 30 years at the way that we're using food, right? So yes, food is critically important as a breaking bread, as they would say, right? I don't step on anybody's faith, but if you read anything in any scriptures when they talk about Jesus, and he said, my body is like this bread, my body is like this wine. Use this in remembrance of me. Breaking of that bread is a bonding moment, and whether you believe in Jesus or not, the story itself is about bonding and remembering that bond to carry it on, right? And we've lost that because of color, because of age, because of gender equality, because of same-sex marriage. We've lost that breaking bread point with one another where we don't want to even have these conversations. Just let you be in your area and I be in my area. And Emily and I are bridging that gap the best we can. But Emily, I'll let you take the question. I took up too much time talking. I get passionate about food.
I love that you get passionate about food and you get passionate about a lot of things. I just want to point out that it is kind of interesting that a boy who grew up in the hood in Louisville and a girl who grew up on a farm outside of West Lafayette, Indiana, that we've actually never met in person, but have effectively broken bread with each other in other ways over the phone and over these kinds of calls. And it's just it makes me think the universe does have a sense of humor and how these things come together. When you first asked that question, Jeff, my mind immediately went to a video that I saw, and I'm racking my brains for the source, and honestly I can't come up with it, but it was about a gentleman in, I want to say, Eastern Europe, might have been Germany. Again, apologies for not getting the details right, but he was the head of the Ku Klux Klan there, which I didn't even know there was a Klan outside of the U.S. But part of how he pivoted from that lifestyle into now being pro social justice, a complete 180, it all hinged on a meal with a Muslim man who was serving him and taking care of him in his time of need. It hinged on that meal. So Can food bring us together? Absolutely. And Jeff, if you need me to dig up the details, I'll go find that for us.
So how did you, Emily and Andre meet? What was the occasion for that?
Yeah, thanks for asking. Actually, Jeff introduced us. Jeff knew the work I was doing, bringing together leaders to look at racial realities in our country through a lens that is, purposefully leaving aside any political affiliation, purposefully leaving aside any, as much as we are able, any kind of preconceived notions to just look at as many resources, as many sources as we possibly could, hold our hands open and just acknowledge what are we seeing. To do that together in a group of leaders, Jeff was aware of that work and then, met Andre and said, I think you two need to meet. So Andre, we should tell them about our first phone call. Because I didn't know necessarily why Jeff was introducing us. But as I'm listening to Andre talk about, and I'll flip it to him and I want him to share his story, but listening to him talk about the work that he's doing around empowering and encouraging people of color and Black folks to not necessarily just write off their white neighbors as being hopeless cases. I'm sorry, Andre, I might not be using the words you would use, but that's kind of how I took it. I thought, oh my goodness, you've got to be kidding me. You're doing work among your people on this issue in a very similar way that I'm doing work among my people on this issue. And I want to bring our people together. I think the way I said it actually was, oh my gosh, you're getting your people together to talk about Black white stuff. I'm getting my people together to talk about Black white stuff. We've got to get our people together to talk about Black white stuff. And he started laughing, and it was just, there was an ease and a peace and a comfort just right on that first call that I knew that we would be working together into the future. So yeah, Andre, why don't you share with them some of the work that you've been doing among your people that made this so obvious?
Yeah, yeah. So us meeting through Jeff, appreciate you, Jeff, for that because it's been very fruitful and plentiful in building this relationship because too many people that are black, and I'm very candid. So if I offend anybody, I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the person next to you. Okay. I talk very candidly, right? And so black people don't really want to deal with white people because they were basically told the white people were the devil. Not so much the devil in the sense of evil in devil and God, more in the sense of good and evil, right? And so they don't want to have these conversations because they always feel this white people have an agenda, right? And in my community, that's how we felt. You know, the white people had some kind of agenda. I just did a podcast about gentrification, and everybody's like, well, they've always had an agenda to push us out and do these things. I was like, that's a conversation we'll table for later because we don't own it. So they're not really pushing us out what we don't own, right? We're fighting building neighborhoods that we don't own. So is it really gentrification? It's more like giving us an exodus to find our own. If we buy the land and stay, then it's no longer gentrification. But that's another conversation. So with meeting Emily through Jeff, it was great because in our conversation, we talked about the similarities between the races not wanting to talk, having those preconceived notions of, well, black people are always like this, white people are always like this. And I personally grew up with a father who was in the military. He was, my father was 45 years older than me. So he was old enough to be my grandfather when I was born, right? And so, but he was during the time of coming right out of slavery, getting drafted to the military. Black people still couldn't eat with the fellow, white guys in the military, couldn't go to the same hotels, et cetera, et cetera. So his mindset was, don't like white people, don't trust them. And that's what he taught me. And up until about 15 or 16, that's how I felt, right? Because that's what I was taught. I didn't like white people. I didn't fool with white people. If I had to deal with them, I dealt with them as little as possible. I didn't like my white teachers. I didn't like I didn't nothing. Nothing of it was good because that's what my father taught me. And in the conversation me and Emily had, she was telling me about her story of being a little girl from Indiana and growing up her entire life not even encountering any black people. And in my mind, I'm like, you didn't meet any black people till you were like in college? Like, like college? I mean, my mailman was white. I knew him at 6 years old, And and it just grew into talking to my own people about the only way that we're going to fix this is to have the conversations that invoke change. We already know what the problem is. Let's have those solution driven conversations and have those, what I like to call courageous conversations, right? Have those courageous conversations about the differences because we'll find out that under the melanin in our skin and the lack in yours, it's the same heart and lung, veins, everything courses the same once you get beneath the surface. If you're having brain surgery, the surgeon very rarely cares if you're black or white because the brain works the same way. Heart surgery, they want to find you compatible. They don't care if your heart is black or white or Hispanic or Middle Eastern. They want to know, is it a compatible fit to make that surgery? And many of us don't take that time to have that mental surgery to understand underneath this color, we're similar, if not the same. And me and Emily were friends from first conversation. After we got through our LinkedIn chat back and forth, Jeff, I promise you, we got on the phone with each other. I know we were on the phone 2.5 hours. And then to find out she's like right there in Indianapolis and I grew up in Louisville, Kentucky, we're talking 3.5 hours from each other.
Oh, wow.
So you talk about the universe being funny, 3.5 hours from each other, never met until 45 years later or so. It's crazy.
Okay, Andre, but I'm gonna challenge you here, right? Right out of the box, I'm gonna challenge you here. Now, you all say that hey, everything's
Okay.
equal and we're all the same under the skin, and everything else. Now, if I show up at a cookout and I bring a potato salad that consists of mayonnaise and potatoes, are you gonna welcome me? He's thinking.
I'll go
He's
fix your
thinking,
potato salad and then I'll let you out.
no, I actually have a really good
Because you
potato
said,
salad that we do.
because because you only thing you said was potatoes and mayonnaise. That's a French dish. That's a French dish we call mayonnaise, and you add some chives on top of it. That's not potato salad.
But some people think it is, and we're not always the most welcome at the cookout when we do. But seriously,
Right,
when we
right.
talk about the workplace, right? The great thing about the kitchen is one of the most diverse places you're ever going to find. You got people from everywhere, and you look through your organization. I bet you have, if you went up to the world map or the globe and started putting pins in from where people are from, you'd see a lot of pins spaced pretty far out because that's the way the culinary work kind of works. How do people get along? I know that it gets hot in the kitchen, it gets stressed out at times. How do people get along so well in that environment?
So the biggest thing in that environment, believe it or not, bourbon. No, I'm just kidding. But the biggest thing in the environment is having the ability to blow off steam and recognize that we don't have to like each other to work together. That's probably the most great thing about my food industry is that oftentimes people don't like the chef because frankly we're a-holes sometimes. We are. We get real anal about certain things, right? And we don't want to hear your stupid opinion. I need you to do it this way. And when you set that precedence in the business, you may not be liked, but you'll be respected because you have that knowledge and maybe a listening ear. And the way that we get along in the kitchen, it's like it's acceptable to be different in the kitchen because of the environment. It's hot, it's sweaty, it's lots of stress, right? You've got to please the people. Wait staff gets cussed out all the time for food that we do wrong, right? All the time. And then we have to deal with the brunt of that with remaking it or hearing the wait staff say, you made this wrong, I put it in medium, you made it rare, and all the foolishness that comes with that in the kitchen. And the way that we balance it out is truly understanding that I don't have to like you to work together because we have the same common goal. And what happens over time, we begin to enjoy each other more because we're forced to be in an environment to work together. We're forced to be next to somebody white, somebody black, somebody Indian because we don't have a choice. And rather than not like them in the kitchen, 80% of the time, we learn to like them and realize that we probably have a lot more in common. So that's how we cope in the kitchen. Mine, is bourbon. Some chefs, it's, going to walk in and punch frozen boxes of corn because nobody hears you cuss in the walk in and call people out of their name and say bad words. The walk-in is like the Bible of the kitchen. You can say every word from here to sun up. You could be as racist, as mean, as sexist as you want with that walk-in door closed. But when you come out, you better come correct and be right.
Amen. Emily, now that sounds similar to your past experience where you're teaching people on the shop floor how to communicate better with each other. Do you find that in the manufacturing and in operations, that's those same kind of pressures yield some of the same benefits with people working together?
Oh, for sure. And how many times have the words "we attack issues, not people" come out of my mouth? But it doesn't happen on accident. I do think that there's a place for good leadership to set that tone. But for sure, when there's a cause greater than us that we really understand we're all pulling together toward, it goes a long way to mitigating some of those discrepancies. But you know, there is still, regardless, I think a lot of fear in most workplaces around topics of race. Most workplaces don't have the pace of a kitchen. Most workplaces are a little less on the line in the moment by moment, like what we just heard Aundre describe. And so I can actually tell you a scenario that a friend shared with me just the other day. She was sitting in the conference room where a marketing team were presenting some potential images to be used for some collateral. And there was a picture, just stock image of the African American woman whose face was kind of turned to the side and chin up a little bit. Then there was an Asian woman who was kind of looking down and away. And then there was in the middle, who they were kind of supposed to be giving their attention to, a white man who was looking beyond both of them. And my friend raised her hand and she said, "Does anyone not see something a little bit off about this? The Black woman is shown as stereotypically Black angry woman. The Asian woman is shown as stereotypically submissive, and the white man is shown as stereotypically indifferent. Does anybody else not see this?" And my friend was Black, who was raising her hand and saying this. She said, "Crickets." No one wanted to engage that conversation around how this image, could be not portraying what they want in their marketing collateral, or even engage that she noticed these things about it. So, when I picture pans banging and flames going and, we got to get these steaks plated and out, that's one thing. When I picture this scenario in a conference room that is very calculated and there's plenty of time, no matter what ultimate goal we're all pulling together toward, I think that time sometimes works against us and allows this fear that lies latent in all of us to really wreak its havoc, to really keep its hold, unless we're aware that that's what's happening and we, intentionally combat that. So wouldn't it be lovely if there could be a do-over of that conference room scenario that I just said? If everyone could just kind of walk away from that and then come back and say, what just happened here? Could we talk openly about what just happened here? Man alive, I think we would be making some progress in our organizations if we could have the stamina, the wherewithal, the stick with it, the persistence. That's the word I've been looking for, and the humility, frankly, to go back to those kinds of conversations that way. Sorry, that was a long-winded answer to your question.
Emily, I want to focus on that word persistence that you just used. A friend of my wife worked long and hard and finally got herself invited to be on the board of a nonprofit that she was really interested in. And the day came when she finally got on there and they had a board meeting and they brought her in and she was welcomed and everybody was very cordial and everything, and the meeting started and all the males around the room were talking about various details, and that finally a topic came up about which she had expertise, and she wanted to provide her expertise to the meeting. And the response that she got was really disappointing. She said she felt like she was the dog that had just started talking in the room. And it just seems like it's guerrilla warfare. You make a certain level, you get invited into the club, but then you want to make a contribution, and there's another hurdle that you've got to jump over. And how do you keep that energy going?
That's a fantastic question. And I think for all of our listeners, it's up to every single one of us. How many times do we look away or back down or not participate? I mean, there were plenty of other people in that conference room that I just described. And I don't know who was around the table at your wife's meeting there as well. But for any of us who are privy to these kinds of open conversations about race, take it as your anointing, maybe. Can we use that word? Or your christening, or you've now been given permission. You're not the only one. When you see something, say something. It's too important to let it go.
Yep. I'm going to piggyback on that and agree. There's three things that I teach people, whether you're working in a business or you own your own. There's three things that are extremely key in your life that has nothing to do with money or time. It has everything to do with VPM, voice, power, and mindset, right? And we all have a voice, we all have the power to use it, and we all have the mindset to direct it in the way that it needs to go. And what happens in many of these boardrooms, um, and jobs in period, not just in boardrooms, but people don't know that they have a voice. So when they speak, they're expecting everybody else to look at them negatively, right? And E equals MC squared. I know everybody knows what that is, right? That everybody knows what that law is, right? But do you know the words? Energy equals mass, sound squared. Okay? When you take that vibrations and energies from one another, having those conversations, what was your, and not saying this about your wife in particular, but I always ask people, what was your thoughts when you went into the meeting and began to speak? If you were thinking of it being negative, right? The people around you are going to feel that you thought that to be negative. Not that you were being negative, but you thought it. I'm the only woman walking into a room full of these men. When I spoke, the men were like, oh my God, look at this beautiful woman coming in here, or cat calling her, or, making their assumptions or anything about her. The voice that we have is the power that we need to maintain the mindset of the energy involved in that. So when we have these courageous conversations as black, white, any color of people, you don't walk into the room expecting the opposite to expect you to be that norm, right? I don't walk into a room and they expect to see, this 380-pound black guy, former football player with, locked hair and a beard. I don't expect them to think I'm some kind of thug. I don't expect them to think that I, grew up in the hood, even though I did. I walk in with the expectancy that I have the same right here as you do. And if we're going to have this conversation, I need you not to feel like I'm going to think that, oh, because I'm white, he's going to think that I'm better than him. Or because I'm white and I've got more money and think that I'm more privileged. No, I need you to walk in on that same equal footing because it's not about the zeros in the bank account, it's about the zeros in your mindset that's missing, right? And it's important to get on that same page when you walk into a room and talk, you know? And it goes for anybody. I deal with a lot of women that deal with exactly what your wife dealt with walking into that room with a bunch of men. They don't think they have a voice. It's like, no, you do have a voice, and you're probably better in most instances than the people around you because they don't want to listen. But I'm sorry, I had to put that in there,
No, Andre, that's
Norm.
that's that's excellent. That brings us to the next thing. When Emily joined us last time, she was talking about the work that you guys were doing. She stressed at how interesting it was that when you talk to each of the groups, you're hearing different things about what they fear, right, and what their fears are. So you have some people who are afraid of having a conversation about race for fear that they'll be perceived as being a racist or a bigot or having something to do with racial oppression. You have other people who are afraid that they're not being listened to and that the very fact of the experience of their life is being denied by people who don't know them. And what other fears come out in these conversations from your perspective, Andre? What are you hearing there as you talk with folks about these issues?
Um, One of the biggest things is they don't feel that who they're talking to is being authentic. It's not like they really care. That's one of the biggest things in my circle of friends because they always ask me, it's like, how are you able just to talk to white people like that? I said, because I don't care if they care, because they're going to care by the end of this conversation because I'm going to talk to them as if they're somebody. I'm not going to talk to them as if they're white or talk to them as if that they're better than me or worse than me. They're going to understand in my language by the time that we're done, okay, he really cares. I should listen. And what has happened with my people, I'll speak on them because I am black, right? What has happened with my black people is that they feel that they're unheard because they're not saying the right things. They're not saying the things that are relevant. You know, like I said, I speak real. They're saying the negative things, like when you hear stuff in rap music or certain interviews where they talk as if they're uneducated and don't have degrees. Nobody wants to hear that. But they also always think it's just the white people that don't want to hear it. No, nobody really wants to hear it. If you get in your mindset to understand that talking like an idiot, nobody wants to hear it, right? And stop being afraid of them not caring. Be more afraid of nothing because there's quite a few that do
Of,
care.
of indifference, in other words, or apathy, or
Yes,
when you
because,
say of nothing? Yep.
well, when I say be afraid of nothing, it's because most of the time, and I'm going to speak again from my circle of people, they always feel as if they're going to get nothing. Okay, like they have a conversation with somebody of a different race, or white people specifically. They feel like they're going to get nothing, no matter how much I tell them that my great grandmother was slave, and they had to pick cotton. I grew up penniless and poor because of X, Y, and Z. They don't feel that they're going to get anything. So when I say them to stop fearing nothing, So what if you have a conversation with someone that's white and they give you nothing? Maybe they have nothing to give, right? It's okay. It's okay if they have nothing to give, right? Stop being afraid. Well, I don't want to have a conversation because I feel like I'm not going to get nothing. I'm not going to get an apology. I'm not going to get a pat on the back. I'm not going to get a hug. Get out of your feelings. If you have the conversation, you won't know what you're going to get if you're expecting nothing to happen. That's what I mean to stop being afraid of nothing. See, Jeff, me and you'll have a conversation. Somebody in my circle would get on this Zoom and probably wouldn't talk until you ask a direct conversation with them, right? And be like, oh, well, this white guy's really not going to care about the fact that I'm talking about white people don't like black people. So I'm just going to say what he think is, acceptable. Oh, yeah, that's exactly what happens in the worst place. Yes, Jeff. No, we need to have these real conversations and be unafraid of nothing, right? It's going to happen. There's some people that are blank slates when we have these conversations. Some a couple of my white friends that I thought were really cool. I had some of these courageous conversations, and I promise they look like not only a deer in the headlights, but the deer in the headlight that was actually shot by the hunter and tied to the front bumper, not the one that got hit, right? And I'm looking at them like we've been friends like 15, 20 years. How do you not see this? You know, I mean, you're as white as the lily flower. How do you not see this, right? And so we just got to stop being afraid of nothing. That's what I mean by being not afraid of nothing. Emily, you were gonna say something?
Well, so I think that one of the fears that my people express to me is that I'm afraid no matter what I say, it will be incriminating, that I'll be blamed. I'm going to say the wrong thing and I'll be blamed. I'll be blamed for everything in our society the way that it is. I'll be blamed for the thing I just said that I said in ignorance. And oh crap, now I see how that might have come off wrong. But there's a deep seated fear of this hyper sense of responsibility to get it perfectly right, which is why a lot of people don't say anything. I wanted to just go back to Aundre. I don't know if you remember when it was an epiphany for me. It might not have been an epiphany for you. We were talking about how uh, we're talking about white and black here. Yes, we can talk about other groups, but we're honing in on white folks and black folks, and we're talking about fears. And how I grew up and how one of my first experiences was going to Chicago, and first experiences of understanding that there was something other than cornfields and soybean fields and rural Indiana. um, Going to Chicago and going through a part of town where there were a lot of black folks, and there also happened to be a lot of bars on windows, and so I associated fear with those areas of town and with black people in general. And so then we were talking about how you had to prep your team to do this big event that you were going to be cooking for. It was a CEO who was charging $4,500 or $45,000, something crazy, to come to his ranch out there in rural Texas somewhere. And you were saying, now we're going to be out in the country. And like you were coaching them through how not to be afraid of being in this white space. And I was realizing that, oh my goodness, we white folks have to talk ourselves through how to be in this black space in the cities. And just we both came to this almost, I don't know if it was funny or sad, simultaneously, epiphany that we're afraid of each other's spaces, and that we pushed each other to each other's spaces, and that we have a lot of fear even there. Hopefully, Jeff, that was a good long pause. You can slice it there for when Aundre gets back in, and hopefully he can pick up there.
That's that's no problem. We can keep talking and join in as we have it. What a great analogy is that part of this is that when we have our fears, we know our fears. They used to teach us when they were teaching negotiation that the key to being a successful negotiator is to understand that the person that you're negotiating with has fears too, right? We know what ours are. They're very well known to us. But if we can just acknowledge, just think for a second, get outside of ourselves and just think, what is it that the other person might fear here? That could be a real powerful way to bring things together. Andre, so when Emily's talking about the fact that uh, the epiphany that you get when you realize that, hey, sometimes black people don't like to be in neighborhoods that are really, really white. White people sometimes fear being in neighborhoods that are really, really black. How do you kind of counter that and get back to the fear of nothing? Uh, that fearlessness, that courageousness. That
So that's a great question, and Emily, yes, it was an epiphany, having to. I had an exec I used to cook for, and they would pay $55,000 per person for a weekend at this ranch out in West Texas, right? And so most of the people that were paying were majority white men and a couple of white women. There was not much of anybody else, and then the whole crew was black. So you could just put in perspective when you think of, all the old movies and things like that, where you see a bunch of white people eating and a bunch of black people working or cooking for them, song and dance, dog and pony show. So I had to train my people to understand. I said, look, I know these people, but we are in the country. I don't need anybody to be afraid of the fact that we are 45 miles from the nearest gas station or police station or fire station, right? So, I need you to understand that you have to be afraid of nothing. And because what's going to happen is going to happen. But if you bring that energy with you, it's truly going to happen, right? Because you brought it. And energy feeds off energy. We're all carbon-based life forms. We feed off each other's energy. You know, you ever have that conversation where you're talking about somebody and then they give you a call, right? Or that old saying, your ears must be burning. I was talking about you. Those aren't just sayings. Those are energy that got, see, are you shaking the head? See, that has nothing to do with color, right? Everybody knows these phrases, right? Because that's the way our universe is, right? And the best way to get back to nothing is to understand that for the most part, these past things, like white people often get blamed for things that their ancestors did. And I tell people, I said, don't blame them for what their ancestors did, blame them for what they're not doing now. I said, I understand slavery. I used to blame my ancestors. I said, why didn't you stay yourself in Africa? Why'd you get on the boat? Right? Why'd you even come over? Right? And people were like, well, you can't blame them for the decisions that you made because you wasn't there. What are you doing to make that change now? Right? And getting my people to understand that, oh my God, it's like pulling teeth. I'm a dentist a lot of times because I'm like, it's okay. All white people aren't bad, just like all black people aren't good, right? Let's keep it real. Let's keep it 100. And in understanding that and building that gap to get back to nothing, you have to release the fear of the unknown. You got to release the fear of them being so much different than you that it cripples you and stifles you from your own personal growth. Because once I got over that hatred that I didn't even that nothing necessarily happened to me as a kid, well, I take that back. There were a few instances of racism that happened to me real bad as a kid, but I got over it. But then my father reiterated with the fact to not trust white people. So as I got older, it just got worse, right? And then, my teenage years is when I realized that, you can't trust everything your parents say. You got to take it as a few grains of salt as opposed to just one grain of salt, right? So, so yeah, I mean, getting back to that nothing, I mean, just realize that, we're arguing over stuff that's petty. We're all gonna die one day. We're all gonna become worm food. We're all gonna deteriorate. Why don't we enjoy our time with one another now and help to build a better world so we can have this world in 30 years, as opposed to having to move to Mars because we destroyed the sun. Foolishness.
I wonder if, in what I've seen uh, from time to time, is maybe there's a failure of imagination in some cases. Uh, if you can't imagine an outcome, it's pretty hard to make it happen. Uh, Let me give you an example. Uh, we were looking to get, let's put it this way, we needed to diversify our workforce. Our plant was located in the suburban Detroit area, and we needed more talent. And we decided that we would actually send delegations into Detroit and talk to people. And we had a nice training program that would bring these people into good middle class jobs. And initially, we ran into a brick wall, and we just couldn't understand it. And what we finally figured out, one of our folks said, "Listen, these people are having a hard time imagining themselves having these kind of jobs. That's what we need to overcome." And so we said, "Okay, we're going to bring them in, and we're going to show them what this job is." And when that happened, wow, everybody signed up, and it was a good deal for everybody. But it was a failure of being able to imagine themselves out of the environment that they were in. That's my interpretation, and I just want to see what your interpretation is.
For sure, our awareness. This goes back, Norm, to the last episode that we talked in. I will say, with quite a bit of certainty, that uh, we can enter into these conversations around race. The degree to which we cultivate our awareness on the realities is the degree to which we can have conversations that are actually reflective of that reality. And yes, that takes a little bit of imagination, because uh, historically, we've been shut off from each other. So, we've heard Aundre describe how growing up, you know, we're not going to give white folks the time of day because they're not going to give us the time of day. And you know what? We can do just fine without them. And, don't trust them. I just saw in Black Enterprise magazine a man who was arrested in Florida, which, by the way, to my white friends, subscribe to Black Enterprise magazine. That'll help with your awareness. But just saw an
Oh,
article.
yes, it will.
Just saw an article of a young man who ran a black family, or a man and his girlfriend and a small child, off the road, yelling racial slurs and pointing his hand at him like it was a gun. And then there was an altercation later on as well. So, you read these things and you see how bifurcated, certain pockets of people are. How did that young white man grow up that led him to that road rage incident? It didn't happen isolated. It didn't happen in a vacuum, in the same way that, Andre grew up with his dad kind of telling him the messages that he did. So back to your point, does it take imagination to, start to break out of the cycles or the norms that we've been sort of imbued with? I mean, I really think it does. And the first step is the hardest. But I think in my own experience, and as I'm trying to cultivate this kind of thinking among leaders, being able to see another way, like your potential employees that you brought in, from the city there, being able to see how this can go, that there can be another way to talk about these realities. It's not like what you get in the media all the time. It's not necessarily your anti-bias training workshops that you've had in your corporate workplace. Like, there is another way to have these open conversations and to cultivate our awareness that's very productive. Once you kind of get down that path, it becomes a lot easier. imagination, I think, could be the key actually to starting that path.
One final question that I want to throw out to you guys. Based on the conversation that we've had here, based on the conversation, Emily, that we had last time around, we've seen in the last couple of years a tremendous amount of eye opening things happen in this world, in this country. And if it doesn't help us understand that there are people who want to divide us, and that when you see things like politicians having parties during a pandemic where they're not wearing any masks, but the people who are serving them, who are not of the same race as them, are all forced to wear a mask. When you see things like the corruption of law enforcement, at some of the highest levels that we have, and what goes on with that, it doesn't take a lot to realize that things that you may have thought in the past, well, these were isolated incidents, or yeah, maybe there's exaggeration going on, are in fact likely to be just total reality, and if anything, understated. So, is the real fear around conversations of race, is the real fear out there on the part of the people who don't want us to be together as one people?
You know, I'm going to preference this way. Good and evil exist in the world. We live in a balanced world. There's just as much good as there is evil in the world. It's just most of the time one gets more publicized than the other. Like when you watch the news, you see more bad stuff than you see the good stuff of little Johnny that got the cat out of the tree for his grandmother. You hear more about the wars and the problems and things of that nature. There's quite a few people in the society that wants to keep us divided, right? They want to keep us divided because it gives control, right? And in that control, it has less to do with race and more to do with keeping control. I tell people this all the time. There's 10%, 5%, and 1% of money earners in this world, and they control 98% of the decision making of the other 75 people that make anything under those 10%, right? And so if they can keep us divided and not unified, means that they can control their sector the way that they need to control their sector, right? Whether it be all the white people, all the black people, all the Native Americans, all the Middle Easterners and foreigners here in this country, and it's not just in the United States; it's worldwide, right? And they want to keep us separate. Then you have people like myself, Emily, and you guys that want to bridge that gap, right? And then we get blackballed in certain places of being sellouts or being not true to your kind, or true to your color, or true to your people, because you want to unify. And last I checked, you know, I need you as much as you need me to function in this world. And even if we do live separate, right? At some point, I'm going to buy my goods and services from you, even if I don't buy from you directly. You know, even if I purchase from your kid or my kid purchase from a kid, and they systematically set us up to have this dissension from the beginning. You know, from the white overseers telling the black people exactly what to do, and then allegedly saying that that we were free but still holding slaves, and then Texas 2 years later. Um, Realizing that they were told they were free, and then they turned it into a national holiday called Juneteenth, which is only for Texas. Now all the states celebrate it, and I think it's the dumbest thing on the planet. We're going to celebrate the fact that they didn't tell us 2 years later, even though the president that gave the Emancipation Proclamation kept his slaves for almost 3 years after he signed that. Right? They don't want to have those conversations of separation. They want to keep us separate. They want to pacify us, which is why they gave the entire nation Juneteenth, and then a flavor company bought the trademark, which is owned by a white man, bought the trademark of Juneteenth. So when he puts the ice cream in Walmart and things like that, people of color are going to go buy it. It was systematically set up to keep us apart. We have to be the champions and change agents to not let that happen. Emily, your thoughts?
Right? And they've given us pacifiers, things like, like Juneteenth,
of making it a national holiday to think that they're, really on our side. It was just a means of control. It was only Texas that was enslaved 2 more years after, even though Abraham Lincoln kept his slaves about 3 years after he signed that Emancipation Proclamation. But to pacify, to keep us separate, right? They want to keep us divided because if we unify and get rid of these color lines, we're going to be tapping into their control. And they don't want to lose that control. It's all about power. It's less about melanin in the skin or lack of thereof, and more about who has the power. And I think that's it. Because, my rant was special till I looked down at my phone and saw, oh my God, they're frozen. Talking to myself.
Emily, any last thoughts from you?
No, just that I hope we can keep having these kinds of conversations en masse. Anybody who wants to get on board, Aundre and I are here for it.
Wonderful. Thank you both for the work you're doing. Thank you for sharing your perspectives with us. And folks, if you want to have fearless, truly fearless conversations with fearless people like Emily and Aundre, this is the place to hear it. So please, if you're out there and you've been on the fence about joining the American Society for Quality as a quality professional, if you are a member of the American Society for Quality and you just want to be part of a people-oriented slice of the organization that's interested in having these kind of discussions, then please join us in the Team and Workplace Excellence Forum. Please go out to myasq.org and see what ASQ has to offer. And thank you to our guests. We will be including in the show notes some links and some additional materials on there, so that if you want to get involved out there, you'll be able to connect with the fine work that these folks are doing. Thank you so much, Aundre. Thank you so much, Emily. Really appreciate everything you're doing.